Survival Guide.
Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're tackling A Quiet Place, The Road Ahead. And we've got this guide to the game's collectibles. Have you seen this thing? It's got me wanting to fire up the game right now.
Yeah, it's impressive. More than just a list.
Yeah.
It's almost like someone's annotated treasure map. It shows you the way, but also kind of teases you about what you might find along the way.
Exactly. Like, it's not just about checking things off a list, you know? You're uncovering little stories, these hidden pieces of the game's world. And A Quiet Place? Man, that world is RIE with stories just waiting to be found.
It really is. We're talking notes, mixtapes, even kids' toys, like stuff you'd think is totally ordinary, but in this post-apocalyptic world, they take on a whole new meaning.
Okay, so before we get totally sidetracked, how is this guide structured? Give us the lay of the land.
Sure, think of it like mirroring the game itself. Each level gets its own section, starting with the prologue, then you move on to the ranch, then the hospital, and so on.
Okay, so it follows the game's progression. Makes sense.
Exactly. And within each level, you'll find these clusters of collectibles, often grouped by where they're located, or maybe a theme they all relate to.
Which is huge for actually finding this stuff. Like, knowing there's a bunch of notes about the hospital staff, so they're probably near, I don't know, the old administrator's office or something. That's got to save a ton of time.
Exactly. This guide's not giving you a step-by-step walkthrough. It's about making your experience richer. Think of it like having a more experienced player next to you, whispering tips like, hey, maybe check that basement for kids' drawings. It's creepy down there.
Speaking of creepy basements and kids' drawings, this guide mentions a note called Note 1 Drawing of Joshi, found in the ranch level safe room. And get this, it's right next to Note 7, Walking to School with Dad.
Ooh, which instantly tells you something about those characters, right? Even before the creatures, there was a bond there, that simple act of walking to school together.
And knowing how things go down for that family in the movies, man, that hits hard.
Right, it's like these extra layers of context. You're not just collecting random objects, you're piecing together fragments of people's lives, you know, lives that were lived and lost.
And some of those fragments are, well, unexpected, to say the least. Case in point, Mixtape 2 Black Metal and Kitties, also from the ranch house. I mean, what's that about? These people rocking out while petting kittens. Who are these people?
It's quite the combo, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it does tell you something. Even in this world that's gone to hell, where sound can get you killed, people are still, well, people, with their own unique quirks.
It makes you wonder about the stories behind those quirks, though, you know?
Yeah.
Who made this mixtape? What were they like before everything went sideways? Like, the game is daring you to figure it out.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Absolutely. So it's not just listing collectibles. This guide connects them to achievements, too, right? There's one called A Run Through the Bushes. Already sounds terrifying, by the way.
Yeah, no kidding.
And the guide says there are collectibles clustered around where you unlock that achievement. So it's like a reward for exploring, for being thorough.
Exactly. Adds a layer of strategy, too. Do you go for the collectibles knowing you're risking making noise attracting those creatures? Or do you try to speedrun it, hoping to snag the achievement and live to explore another day?
Right, like choose your own adventure, Apocalypse Edition. And speaking of high-stakes choices, this guide seems to point out missable achievements, those ones that make you want to rage quit if you miss them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Think of it like having someone watching out for you, going, hey, heads up, hospital level's got a couple of those you can totally screw yourself over on.
Okay, so we've talked about how the guide is put together, the types of collectibles, and those oh-so-important achievements. Let's dive into the actual items themselves, and we'll go in order, starting way back at the beginning with the prologue.
Interesting. The prologue itself is so short, but the guide's saying there are things to find there. Makes you wonder what you might miss just rushing through.
It's cool how even the prologue has secrets, you know? Like, the devs were so into this idea of hiding little stories everywhere, they even put them in the intro.
Totally. And it sets the mood, right? Like that thing in a movie where you glimpse something in the background, seems unimportant, but later you're like, whoa, that meant something.
Right. Okay, so the guide says the prologue's light on actual items, but it's got achievements for the difficulty levels. Easy does it well, that's self-explanatory, but then there's an arduous journey for those who jump right to hard mode. Bold move.
Choosing your difficulty right away in these kinds of games, man, that's a tough one. Sets the tone for the whole thing, you know. Going hard right off the bat, that's a statement. Tells me you're not messing around.
Oh, for sure. It's like watching a horror movie, but you crank the volume and make sure all the lights are off.
Exactly. And based on later collectibles, Seems like the devs wanted to reward those players who went all in on the challenge early on. It's almost like they're saying, you found that prologue tough. Just wait, things are going to get real.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's hit the ranch.
The ranch levels, where we really start digging into the story the collectibles tell, notes, mixtapes, those kids' toys we mentioned. Each one gives you a little peek into the lives of whoever lived there.
Yeah, and we actually get some specifics in this level, like Note 5 Red Cloud Ranch Flyer. I'm picturing, like, something on a bulletin board, maybe advertising a local fair, something like that. Just a little slice of life before everything went down.
Yeah, reminds you this world wasn't always scary and silent. There was community, shared stuff.
And now it's just echoes in that, In old flyers, things people kept, makes you want to, touch those things, try to feel what it was like back then.
Totally. It's a powerful thing, that longing for a past you never even knew. And the devs put that into the game through these little objects.
Yeah.
Really smart.
The details, man, that's what gets you. Speaking of, let's go back to that mixtape to Black Metal and Kitties from that ranch house. What do you think, was that made before the apocalypse or after?
Oh, now that's a good question. And it's kind of what this deep dive is all about, yeah?
Yeah.
We're not just listing things, we're trying to figure out what they mean. We're like detectives, putting puzzle pieces together.
Okay, so, detective work. This mixtape. Before the apocalypse, I could see someone making this totally weird playlist just for themselves. Like, they're secretly into kittens, but also love metal. Or maybe it's a joke to freak their friends out.
But then, think about after everything went bad. In a world that's gone nuts, maybe this weird mix of sounds was a way to hold on to who you were before.
Right. Like, sound could get you killed, but this person's like, whatever, I'm going to blast my metal and pet my cat.
Hardcore.
Right. Small thing, but
Yeah.
tells you something about people, Finding joy, even when things are awful.
And don't forget what the guide said about that ranch's safe room. Note 1 drawing of Joshi, right next to Note 7 walking to school with Dad. That pairing, those little family moments, they hit different in this world, yeah.
Oh, totally. Especially thinking about the movies, how far a parent will go to keep their kids safe in this world. Those notes become even more intense. Reminds you life's fragile, those everyday moments, we take them for granted.
Exactly. Adds a whole other level to the game, beyond just being scared. Those aren't just collectibles, they're pieces of lives, Makes the world of a quiet place feel even more real and kind of heartbreaking, honestly.
It's wild, right? How these little details, these glimpses into people's lives can totally change how a game feels.
It's the difference between just playing a game and feeling like you're really there.
Totally. Okay, so we've done the ranch, which was kind of safe, relatively speaking, but the guide says the hospital level, way more intense.
See, hospitals are already emotionally charged places, right?
Yeah.
Even without monsters chasing you. Hope, fear, all that. It's life or death stuff baked right in.
And the guide really plays that up. There are clusters of notes scattered all over, each one giving you a peek into the people who were stuck there.
Yeah, like note 36 baby names found in your room. Can you imagine? Everything's going to hell, but someone's still thinking about the future, about having a baby.
That's kind of beautiful, but also really sad when you think about it. You're in this scary hospital, and you find this list of names, like a little spark of hope. Man.
And then there's note 7 unfinished letter from Martin's room. What was Martin going to say? Who was he writing to? We'll never know.
Oh, and speaking of Martin's room, the guide mentions note 24, open mic night. An open mic at a hospital.
Now, that's interesting, right? Was that a regular thing before the apocalypse? Or maybe something they started after to keep their spirits up?
Either way, it changes how you see that hospital. It's not just a place to get patched up. It's where people connected, found comfort in music.
Yeah, it shows you the power of art, even in the worst times.
Totally. Okay, guide also mentions a note called Note 27 Radio Silence near the hospital chapel. That title alone is creepy.
Yeah, like all connections gone, right? Totally cut off. Really drives home that feeling of being alone.
And for a game all about sound, Radio Silence is even harder. Not just no noise, but no hope either.
Heavy stuff.
Okay, enough nightmare fuel from the hospital. Let's go to the forest level. Guide says collectibles here are more about the environment itself.
Yeah, you start to see less personal stories, more about nature, the world itself. Like the guide mentions info stands with notes like Note 8, the squirrel, and Note 9, drawing of a squirrel.
A whole squirrel thing. Okay, I'm listening.
It's subtle, but it's saying life goes on, even with all this craziness.
Yeah.
Nature finds a way.
And not just squirrels, right? There are notes about bees, owls, all kinds of animals. It's like the devs wanted us to remember there's a whole world out there beyond the monsters, all trying to survive.
Exactly. And it makes you think, how did all this change things? How did animals adapt to a world where sound is dangerous?
So much world building packed into these little details.
It really makes you appreciate how much thought went into this game. Scary, yeah, but also beautiful, Hope and despair all mixed together.
Okay, before we wrap this up, gotta mention the lake house.
The lake house is weird, right? Feels peaceful, like it's untouched by everything.
And yet, Guide says it's full of memories. There's note 1 birthday card, like a reminder of good times that got cut short.
Yeah, and that photo album with all the normal stuff, a swing set, family, birthday cake, but now it's all gone.
Haunting, almost. Like looking at someone else's happiness, knowing what happened.
It makes you realize what they're fighting for in this world.
Man, this guide is amazing. We've just scratched the surface, and I want to jump back into a quiet place right now, find all this stuff myself.
That's what it's all about, right? This deep dive's giving you a taste, a map, but the exploring, that's all you. What will you find out there in the quiet?
Something to think about. We'll see you on the next deep dive.